Episode 1. The First Whisper. I should have left when the candles died. That was the rule. No one remained in the chapel after midnight, but I lingered, staring at the altar carved from black stone, its surface veined with cracks like old scars. I had been assigned to polish it, though no hand could make it shine. The air was colder than it should have been, pressing against my chest like a warning. And then it happened. The altar spoke, not with words I knew, not with the Latin we chanted at dawn, nor the simple prayers whispered by the faithful. This was older, deeper, an unholy murmur that sounded as if the stone itself exhaled. The voice dragged across the silence like rusted chains, syllables soaked in dust and grief. At first I thought I was imagining it. Days in the monastery had already blurred time into shadows and bells. But then I heard it again, louder this time, and my blood froze. It said my name. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the brass candle stand. My heart clawed at my ribs. "Who's there?" My voice echoed, but no one answered. Only the altar, breathing in a tongue that should not exist. The sound was not speech. It was hunger wrapped in language. My ears rang with it, and my bones felt brittle, as if they recognized the voice long before I did. Something inside me whispered, "This is not the first time you've heard it." I fled to my cell that night, trembling. I pressed the pillow against my ears, but the echo followed. The syllables repeated themselves in rhythm with my heartbeat, growing more familiar the longer I resisted. By dawn, I no longer denied it. The altar had spoken, and the altar had chosen me. The next day, I sought counsel from Father Matthias, the oldest priest in the monastery. His back was bent, his hands veined like dried riverbeds. When I told him what I heard, he didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he lowered his voice and said, "You heard it too soon." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Too soon? I pressed him for answers, but he only shook his head, muttering about stones older than Christ, about ruins buried beneath cathedrals. That night, I swore I would not go near the chapel. But temptation has teeth. When the bells marked midnight, I found myself standing once more before the black altar. My knees trembled, yet I couldn't turn away. The silence was thick, a silence that waited. And then, like breath against the ear of the dead, it whispered again. This time, the words curled into a shape I almost understood. Not prayer, not blessing, but a command. And God forgive me, I wanted to obey. Episode 2. The Forgotten Translation. I tried to convince myself that it was only exhaustion, that the altar had not truly spoken, that my mind had conjured a voice from shadows. Yet when the chapel bells tolled the morning hour, I carried the memory of those syllables like a brand upon my soul. They clung to me, thick and sour, echoing in my skull as though carved into the marrow of my bones. That day, while others tended the gardens and kitchens, I drifted into the monastery's library. It was a place few entered, its shelves sagging with the weight of forgotten centuries. The air smelled of dust and candle wax, the silence heavy with all the words never spoken aloud. I do not know what guided me. My hands moved without thought, skimming over cracked spines until one book resisted, bound in flaking leather. It bore no title. Its lock had long since rusted away. I opened it, and there they were. Symbols, jagged, curling letters that slashed across the yellowed pages like wounds. The instant my eyes touched them, my heart lurched. I knew them. They were not identical to the sounds I had heard from the altar, but close enough to make my skin crawl. The voice had been spelling itself into my memory, and here, in this forgotten book, it had taken shape. I traced one of the characters with my finger. The air grew colder. My lips moved, sounding out the syllable. It rasped against my tongue like ash. And when I spoke it, the candle beside me guttered, shrinking to a red ember. I snapped the book shut, breath quickening. I should have run, should have burned it, but temptation is a serpent. That night, when the others slept, I returned to the library with a lantern hidden under my cloak. I opened the book again, this time reading further. The margins were filled with notes in Latin, written by some forgotten hand centuries before. A desperate translation attempt. My eyes darted across the lines. Lingua mortuorum, the tongue of the dead. The translator had not finished, but a few fragments were clear enough. Words like confession, judgment, blood, and then, scrawled at the bottom of a page, a single chilling warning. Do not let the altar hear you repeat it. My throat went dry. The altar. It had been here long before our prayers, before this monastery was even laid. The book seemed to know. The writer had known. I shut the lantern, clutching the volume to my chest, but I could not silence the hunger growing inside me. What if I could understand it? What if the whispers could finally make sense? When the next midnight came, I carried the book with me into the chapel. The stone altar loomed in the dark like a predator waiting to pounce. My knees buckled as I set the book down upon it, its pages shivering in the draft. The voice rose at once, stronger, clearer, and for the first time I recognized a word. My name. Episode 3. Blood on the Stone. The night I laid the book upon the altar, something changed. It was no longer just whispers in the dark. It was dialogue. The black stone seemed to throb, each syllable echoing like a pulse under the floor. I bent closer, breath shallow, the inked characters on the page quivering as though alive. Then the first drop fell. I thought it was wax from the candles, but when it hit the page, it spread crimson. My stomach tightened as I touched it. Warm, sticky, blood. It was seeping from the cracks in the altar, running in thin veins across the stone. I staggered back, horrified, but the book drank it in. The crimson lines fused with the symbols, illuminating them in a terrible glow. And in that moment, I could read more. Confess, reveal, bleed. The words cut into my mind as if etched with a blade. My knees buckled, and before I realized, I was whispering everything I had buried. The lies, the moments of weakness, the nights of doubt when I questioned God himself. The altar answered. Its voice was no longer only a murmur. It was a chorus, layered with tones of men, women, children, the dying and the damned. The language was still dead, yet my soul understood it. And in the heart of those syllables was judgment. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the words still poured inside me. My eyes burned, and when I lifted my hand, I saw a smear of red. The blood wasn't only coming from the altar now, it was coming from me, from my nose, my ears, even the corners of my eyes. I dropped to my knees. Please, I begged, not sure to whom I was speaking. Enough. The voice hushed at once. Silence pressed against me like stone walls closing in. I thought it was over until I looked down. On the altar's surface, the blood had gathered into a single word. Written not in Latin, not in the tongue of prayer, but in the dead language I should never have learned. And I could read it. Chosen. My chest tightened. My breath came in ragged gasps. Chosen for what? To serve? To suffer? Or to be sacrificed? I slammed the book shut and fled into the corridor, leaving bloody footprints on the cold floor. But no matter how far I ran, the word burned behind my eyes. I was marked. The altar had not merely spoken, it had called me, and I feared I had already answered. Episode 4. The Silent Witness. I thought I could bury what had happened, that if I ignored the book, the blood, the whispers, they would fade like a nightmare at dawn. But nightmares don't fade in this place. They linger, heavy as incense smoke, clinging to every stone. It was Father Matthias who finally cornered me. His eyes, clouded by age, still pierced through me with unsettling clarity. "You've heard it again," he said, not as a question but as a certainty. I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. He beckoned me to follow him, his steps dragging yet deliberate. He led me deep beneath the monastery, into corridors that smelled of damp stone and forgotten prayers. At the end of the passage, he pushed open a warped wooden door, and we entered a crypt. Candles flickered, revealing walls etched with strange carvings, spirals, clawed shapes, faces distorted in agony. At the center of the chamber stood another block of the same black stone as the altar above, but cracked in half, lifeless. "Do you know where our altar came from?" he asked. I shook my head. "It was never ours." His voice rasped like a confession. "Before this monastery stood, there was a temple here, not to God, not to Christ, but to something older, something buried when Rome still bled." He placed his withered hand on the cracked block. "When our brothers built the chapel centuries ago, they carved the altar from the ruins. They believed consecration would cleanse it. They were wrong. Stone remembers." The words chilled me. Stone remembers. I thought of the altar above, bleeding in the candlelight, speaking in a dead tongue. My mouth went dry. "Why not destroy it?" I asked. He gave a bitter laugh. "Many have tried. Hammers shatter, fire sputters, even holy water boils on its surface. The altar cannot be broken. It consumes those who attempt it. His eyes locked onto mine. That's why it chooses one among us. Always one. A witness. A vessel. My stomach twisted. And you knew it was me? I prayed it wouldn't be, he whispered, his shoulders sinking. But the signs are clear. The bleeding. The words. It has marked you, just as it once marked me. For a moment, the crypt seemed to close in on me, the shadows swelling, the cracked stone whispering inaudibly. My thoughts reeled. If Matthias had been chosen before me, how had he survived? Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a trembling murmur. Survive? No. You don't survive it. You endure until the altar takes what it demands. And when it does, you will pray for silence. But silence will not come. I stared at him, horror crawling up my throat. The old priest's hands trembled as he traced the carvings on the wall, his lips moving in silent prayer. And I realized then, he wasn't warning me. He was waiting for his turn to end. Episode 5, Confessions in Reverse. Father Matthias's words haunted me long after we left the crypt. You don't survive it. You endure. The thought gnawed at me through every prayer, every hymn, every hollow ritual. By the time midnight came, I no longer resisted the pull of the chapel. The altar was waiting. I carried the book under my arm, its pages still flecked with dried blood. My legs felt heavy, but my heart beat with a dreadful anticipation. I told myself I would end it tonight, confront the whispers, force them into silence. Yet even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. When I knelt before the altar, the air pressed down on me, thick as smoke. The cracks in the stone glowed faintly, as though embers smoldered within. I opened the book to the page where the warning had been scrawled. Do not let the altar hear you repeat it. And I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I spoke. My sin is pride, I whispered, my voice trembling. I doubted the faith. I envied the life I left behind. The altar shuddered. A sound like grinding stone filled the chapel. Then, to my horror, the words came back to me, not as forgiveness, not even as echo, but as reversal. Behind left I life the envied, faith the doubted I, pride is sin my. The voice was my own, yet warped, dragged backward through time, syllables twisted until they were unrecognizable. My skin prickled, my stomach churned. The more I confessed, the more the altar fed on it, vomiting the sins back in reverse, as though undoing prayer itself. My sin is lust, I forced out, desperate to be rid of it. The altar answered, a chorus of voices, children, women, men, all speaking my shame backward, dragging it through the dark. Lust is sin, my. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears, but the words drilled into me. They tangled in my thoughts, rewriting them until I no longer knew what I had said, or what the altar had forced me to remember. Blood welled in my mouth. I spat crimson onto the floor, trembling. Please, forgive me. The altar exhaled. The candles dimmed. And then came a silence deeper than death. On its surface, the blood that had leaked from its cracks spread into shapes, letters, words in that same dead tongue. Somehow, I understood. No forgiveness. Tears blurred my vision. I tried to rise, but my legs betrayed me. The altar whispered again, softer this time, but cruelly intimate. And it didn't speak in Latin. It didn't speak in the dead tongue. It spoke in my mother's voice. It told me sins I had never confessed aloud, sins buried so deep I had forgotten them myself. Yet the altar knew. It spoke them backward, as if unraveling the thread of my soul. I collapsed against the cold floor, shaking, realizing the truth. Confession was not salvation here. It was a weapon, and the altar was sharpening it against me. Episode 6, The Choir That Fled. The monk said the voice was mine alone, that I was cursed with hallucinations, tormented by the weight of my own sins. I prayed they were right. I prayed the altar's whispers lived only in me. But then came the night of the choir. It was Sunday Vespers. The chapel glowed with candlelight, the air trembling with the sound of 40 voices woven into one. The hymn rose, rich and steady, filling the vaulted ceiling with devotion. For a moment, even I felt safe. The altar was silent, shrouded in shadow. Then the shadows moved. The black stone quivered, its cracks leaking a faint red shimmer like veins beneath skin. And suddenly, in the midst of the hymn, the choir faltered. One note dropped, then another. The harmony fractured, splintered, as every singer froze with terror. Because they heard it too. The altar was speaking, a whisper, low at first, crawling beneath the music like a parasite, then louder, weaving itself into the hymn. The voices of the monks trembled as the altar's dead tongue filled the chapel, twisting holy melody into blasphemy. I saw Brother Samuel clutch his throat as though strangled. Another monk tore the rosary from his neck and fled down the aisle. Within moments, the choir collapsed into chaos, some screaming, some sobbing, some running for the doors. But a few fell to their knees, their eyes glazed, their mouths slack, and without hesitation they began to repeat the altar's words. Word for word, note for note, their voices merged with the dead tongue, forming a chorus that did not belong to men. I stood frozen, my heart hammering. The sound was unbearable, an anthem that was not of heaven nor hell, but of something older, hungrier. It scraped against my skull, burrowing into my mind. And then I realized something worse. I understood it. The words were no longer a mystery. The book, the blood, the confessions. I had been prepared for this moment. The altar wasn't singing. It was commanding. Bow, offer, serve. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the command had already sunk into my bones. My knees buckled. I fought against the invisible weight pressing me to the floor. Around me, monks collapsed one by one, their voices turning into instruments of the altar's hymn. Only Father Matthias remained standing, his frail body trembling but unbroken. He raised the crucifix high, his voice shaking as he tried to drown out the chant with Latin prayers. For a fleeting second, the air stilled. Then the crucifix snapped in his hand like dry wood. The chorus roared and Matthias crumpled. The doors of the chapel burst open as those still conscious fled into the night. I stumbled after them, but the voice followed, echoing inside me even as I ran into the cold air. The hymn was unfinished. The altar would not rest until it was complete. And God help me, part of me wanted to go back and sing it. Episode 7, The Priest's Secret. The chapel never recovered after that night. Half the choir fled the monastery before dawn, their vows abandoned in the dust. Those who stayed moved like shadows, eyes hollow, lips sealed, afraid that if they opened their mouths, the altar's words would pour out again. But Father Matthias, he did not flee. He moved slower, yes, but with a strange determination, as though the chaos had confirmed something he had long suspected. I watched him in secret, and what I saw curdled the last drops of faith in me. Every night, after Compline, he slipped into the chapel alone. I followed once, silent as the dead. From the shadows, I saw him kneel before the altar, not in prayer but in conversation. His lips moved without sound, answering whispers only he could hear. When he rose, he carried scraps of parchment back to his cell. I waited until the small hours of the morning, then crept inside while he slept. The parchments lay scattered across his desk. Not scripture, not prayers, orders, in the same dead tongue. I could not read them all, but enough of the symbols were familiar to chill me. Blood, vessel, chosen, sacrifice. Each command written carefully, as though he were a scribe transcribing Holy Writ. But these were not the words of God. They were dictations of the altar. One parchment bore my name. I dropped it, my fingers numb. My name, written in jagged strokes of ink the color of dried blood. Next to it, the word I dreaded most, chosen. A floorboard creaked. I turned. Matthias stood in the doorway, candlelight flickering across his face. He did not look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked relieved. "You've read them," he whispered. His eyes gleamed with the feverish light. "Good. Then you understand." "Understand what?" My voice cracked. "That this is no curse." He stepped closer, the candle trembling in his grip. "It is revelation. The altar speaks the first language. The tongue before Babel, before Eden fell. To hear it is to be touched by the divine." "Divine?" I spat. "It speaks in blood. It drives men mad. It chooses." Matthias cut me off. His frail hand clutched my arm with surprising strength. "It has marked you, as it marked me before. But my time is almost ended. You will continue the work. You must." I pulled away, heart pounding. "Work? What work?" His smile was a crack across his face. "To prepare the offering. The stone remembers, and it hungers. One life to keep the rest of us safe. That is the covenant." The candlelight wavered. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw the shadows behind him move, stretching, bending, bowing toward the altar above us. And I realized with dawning horror, Father Matthias was not resisting the altar. He was serving it. Episode 8, The Night of Ashes. I did not sleep after discovering Matthias's secret. His words circled me like vultures. One life to keep the rest of us safe. Safe from what? From the altar itself, or from what it threatened to awaken? That night the chapel was restless. The air stank of damp stone and old wax, and yet the flames of the candles burned too brightly, as though starved of oxygen. I went there against my will, drawn as though a rope were tightening around my chest. When I entered, I froze. The altar was not silent. It was humming. The sound vibrated through the pews, through the floor, through the marrow of my bones. Low, steady, ancient. The book on the lectern shivered as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. Then the pages ignited. The fire erupted without spark or tinder, a flame black at its heart, blue at its edges. I lunged forward to smother it, but the book would not burn like paper. The fire did not consume. It revealed. Ash bloomed across the pages, forming words in the dead tongue, lines of command written in smoke and ember. The altar was writing its own scripture. I coughed, eyes stinging as I read fragments. Blood, covenant, fire, renew. Behind me, footsteps. Father Matthias appeared, his face hollow but his eyes alive with rapture. "Do you see?" he cried over the hum. "It speaks the covenant anew. It has chosen the hour." "The hour for what?" I demanded. He did not answer with words. Instead, he took a torch from the wall and thrust it into the black flame. It caught instantly, hissing like a serpent. He turned to the pews, to the crucifixes, to the sacred vestments. One by one he touched them, and each went up in silent fire. The hymnals curled into ash without smoke. The statues of saints cracked and blackened. The crucifix above the altar sagged, dripping molten metal like tears. The chapel became a furnace. I tried to stop him, but the air itself pushed me back, thick as hands. The hum grew louder, shifting into 1,000 layered voices, all chanting in the dead tongue. The ash swirled, coating my lips, searing my lungs. Then the fire wrote one last word across the altar. My name. I fell to my knees, choking. The meaning was undeniable. The offering Matthias spoke of was not some distant sacrifice. It was me. The old priest raised his torch high, eyes wild, mouth chanting along with the altar. The shadows behind him twisted into shapes that bent toward me, like mourners gathering for a funeral. And as the flames devoured the last relic of Christ in that chapel, I realized the altar was not demanding fire. It was demanding me through fire. Episode 9, The Language of the Damned. The chapel reeked of smoke for days, though no ember remained. Its walls were blackened, its crucifix sagged like a corpse, and yet the altar stood untouched, dark, unscarred, as if it had been the fire's master, not its victim. I thought no one outside would believe what had happened, but the church did send someone. He arrived at dusk, a thin man wrapped in a scholar's robes, his face hollow from too many sleepless nights. His name was Dr. Gabriel Corvus, a linguist summoned from Rome. They said he specialized in tongues that no one remembered. From the moment he entered the chapel, I knew he had heard rumors long before he came. His eyes fixed on the altar with something between dread and hunger. "You've heard it, haven't you?" he asked me in private. My throat closed. "What makes you say that?" "Because it never speaks unless the vessel is near," he murmured, and for a moment I wondered if he was speaking of me or himself. That night he opened the book I had found, his thin fingers trembling as he traced the ash-stained pages. He read aloud the fragments of translation, his Latin precise, his voice a brittle reed. Then he whispered a word I had only heard from the altar itself. The stone responded. Its surface pulsed, cracks glowing faintly red, like veins filled with embers. Corvus did not recoil. He leaned closer, eyes wide with fascination. "Do you know what this is?" he whispered. "It is Eblite, a language buried with a city destroyed before Abraham walked the earth." The word struck me like a hammer. Eblite. I had never heard it, yet it explained everything and nothing. "Why would it speak a dead tongue?" I demanded. His smile was thin, fevered. "Because death is no barrier to truth. This is the language of kings and priests who defied God. Their words were drowned in blood, their city reduced to dust, but the tongue remained. It always remains." He turned to me, eyes glittering. "Do you not see? This altar is not merely stone. It is memory. It remembers the first rebellion. It speaks the liturgy of the damned. A chill slid down my spine. And what does it want? Corvus's expression darkened. He leaned so close his breath chilled my ear. It wants to finish what was begun. It wants its hymn completed. And it will use you to sing it. The candles sputtered. The altar groaned like shifting earth. I swear I heard my name ripple through the air, twisted by countless voices. Corvus did not flinch. He wrote furiously, transcribing every sound. "Do not resist," he hissed. "To understand is to join, and to join is to survive." But I knew then he was already lost, because the altar had not chosen him. It had chosen me. Episode 10, The Sacrifice Remembered. Dr. Corvus filled page after page with symbols, his hand feverish, his eyes hollow with obsession. He believed himself a scribe, a vessel of revelation, but I could see it for what it was: possession. The altar had found a mirror in him, though I was still its chosen. That night, the whispers grew sharper, no longer content with muttered syllables. They called for something tangible, something the pages of a book could not provide. Blood. I felt it before I heard it. My veins throbbed with heat, my chest tight as though my very lifeblood was being pulled toward the altar. I staggered to my knees, clutching the edge of the black stone, and then I saw it. Shadows moving across the surface, shapes of figures bowing, kneeling, offering, sacrifices. Visions poured into me like a flood. I saw centuries of devotion twisted into slaughter, lambs, goats, then men and women, bound and broken across the altar's face. Their blood seeped into the stone, each offering feeding its hunger, each prayer drowned beneath screams. And then I saw a boy, his face young, his eyes wide with terror as a blade hovered above him. He mouthed a prayer, but not to God, to the altar. When the blade fell, I screamed. I lurched backward, the vision dissolving, but the stench of iron clung to the air. Corvus knelt calmly beside me, his quill scratching furiously. "It is remembering," he whispered. "Do you not see? It wants the covenant restored." I shook my head, trembling. "No, it wants death." He smiled, teeth pale in the candlelight. "What is sacrifice but proof of faith?" I turned away from him, but the altar would not let me escape. Blood welled again from its cracks, trickling onto the floor, forming letters I could read too clearly. Offer, vessel, chosen. The words seared into my mind, their meaning undeniable. The altar did not want animals, nor relics, nor ash. It wanted flesh, living flesh, mine. I stumbled into the cold air outside the chapel, gasping, desperate for distance. But no matter how far I ran across the cloister's courtyard, the word followed me, echoing inside my skull. Chosen, chosen. Father Matthias found me at dawn. He looked at me with weary eyes, and for the first time, pity. "You've seen it," he said softly. "The altar never hides its appetite. It has asked for you." I wanted to deny it, to shout that I would never kneel, never bleed for that stone. But even as the words formed in my mouth, I felt the truth pressing against my chest like a blade. I was not being asked. I was being prepared. And the altar would not stop until it drank of me. Episode 11. The Excommunication. They came at dawn, 6 priests draped in scarlet and gold, their crucifixes gleaming like weapons, their hands clutching vials of holy water and censers thick with smoke. Rome had heard, Rome had judged, and Rome had sent its executioners. The monks gathered in the courtyard as the priests entered the chapel. Their leader, Cardinal Severus, walked with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He looked at the black altar as if it were nothing more than stone, as if centuries of whispers and blood could be silenced by Latin chants. But I knew better. The altar was waiting. They began the rite at once, circling the stone, chanting the words of exorcism. Holy water hissed against its surface, the scent of burnt metal filling the air. For a moment, hope flickered in me. Perhaps the church was strong enough. Perhaps I could be free. Then the altar laughed, not in sound but in tremor. The stone groaned, splitting further along its ancient cracks, the ground quivering beneath our feet. The priests faltered, but Severus barked at them to continue. Their chants grew louder, desperate, each word trembling with fear. And then the altar spoke, not in whispers, not in hunger, but in fury. The dead tongue burst forth like a storm, 1,000 voices layered into one. The chapel shuddered, windows bursting inward, shards of glass raining upon us. The priests screamed, clutching their heads as blood poured from their ears and eyes. One by one they collapsed, writhing on the floor, their prayers unraveling into broken sobs. Holy water boiled in its vials, hissing steam that scalded their skin. Severus alone remained standing, his crucifix raised high, his voice straining against the tide. "In the name of Christ!" The altar cut him short. A crack split its surface wide, and from within a gout of blood erupted, drenching him head to toe. His scream was swallowed by the chorus, and when the blood cleared, his body lay limp, eyes burned white. Silence fell. The monks fled the chapel, some shouting, some weeping, all faith shattered. I remained frozen, staring at the ruin. The priests had come with fire and authority, but they had been nothing more than fuel for the altar's hunger. Then the stone whispered again, softly this time, almost tender. It spoke a single word in the dead tongue. I understood it. "Continue." My knees buckled. I realized what the exorcism had truly meant, not to silence the altar, but to prove that it could not be silenced, not by Rome, not by holy water, not by Christ himself. I stumbled into the night air, trembling, my cassock soaked with blood that was not mine. Father Matthias met my gaze across the courtyard. His lips did not move, but his eyes told me what I already knew. The church had failed, and now there was no one left between me and the altar. Episode 12. The Name in the Ashes. The chapel lay in ruin, soaked with the blood of priests who had believed their prayers stronger than the stone. Their corpses had been carried out, but their screams still clung to the walls. No one dared enter now. No one, except me. I told myself I went to seek answers, but in truth I was dragged there by something stronger than will. The altar had tasted too much to be ignored, and it would not rest until I returned. The night was heavy with ash. Though the fires had long since died, the air was thick with the stench of smoke, and every step left my boots powdered gray. I pushed open the chapel doors, and the silence greeted me like a predator. The altar was waiting. It no longer looked like stone. Its cracks glowed faintly, pulsing as though veins carried blood beneath its surface. The book I had left there was gone, consumed perhaps, or hidden within. On the altar's face lay only one thing: ash. But not random ash, words. Letters had formed in thick gray dust, arranged into the dead tongue that I now understood without translation. And at the center of them all was a name. My name. I staggered forward, my breath caught in my throat. The letters shifted as I stared, scattering and reforming until they burned into a sentence. I did not want to read it, but my eyes would not look away. "The vessel is ready." The air thickened, pressing down on me like 1,000 unseen hands. My knees buckled, the ash trembled and lifted, swirling into the air until it clung to my skin, my clothes, my lips. The taste was bitter, metallic. I spat, but more of it slid down my throat, choking me. And then the whispers began again, not soft this time, not distant. They spoke from inside me, vibrating in my bones. My own voice echoed back at me in reverse, just as it had that night of confession. But now the words weren't sins, they were vows. I am chosen. I am vessel. I am offering. I tried to resist, clawing at my throat as though I could tear the words free, but the altar fed them into me. My chest burned. My pulse thundered. A shadow moved behind me. Father Matthias stood in the doorway, his frail body lit by the flickering light of a dying candle. His face was wet with tears. "It has written you," he whispered, "just as it once wrote me. You cannot escape." I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he hadn't warned me sooner, but my voice was gone. Only the altars remained. The ash on its surface began to glow, shaping once more into words, each one searing into my mind. Blood will seal it. And I knew, with a certainty that shattered me, that the altar would not wait much longer. Episode 13, The Last Sermon. The chapel doors groaned as they shut behind Father Matthias, sealing us inside. The air was thick, heavy, suffocating. I could see in his trembling hands the weight of years, but in his eyes there was something harder, resolve, as if he had made peace with damnation long ago. He climbed the steps toward the altar, dragging his breath like a penitent climbing a mountain. When he turned to face the empty pews, his voice cracked at first, then grew stronger, rising in cadence. It was a sermon, but not in Latin, not in the tongue of Rome or of Christ. It was the dead tongue. Each word slithered into the air, curling against the walls like smoke, wrapping around me until I could not breathe. The altar pulsed in rhythm with his words, its cracks glowing brighter, the stone alive with hunger. Matthias lifted his hands. Brothers, sisters, hear the tongue before Eden. Hear the truth before the lie of salvation. There was no one left to listen but me. Yet he preached as if the chapel overflowed, his words echoing with voices not his own. Men, women, children, a multitude layered through his throat. I staggered forward, clutching the pews for balance. Stop, I rasped. You don't know what you're saying. He looked down at me, his face wet with sweat and tears. I know exactly. I have spoken its gospel for years in silence. Tonight, I give it voice. Tonight, the covenant is fulfilled. The altar shuddered. Ash lifted from its surface like smoke and swirled around him, wrapping his frail body in a shroud. For a moment, he looked like a prophet crowned in fire. But then the blood came. It seeped from his mouth, his eyes, his fingertips dripping onto the altar. He did not falter. His sermon grew louder, stronger, until his body convulsed with every syllable. Each drop of blood that struck the stone flared like molten iron, spelling words I could read too clearly. Sacrifice, vessel, chosen. My knees buckled, my name pulsed among the words. No, I shouted, forcing myself forward. I grabbed his arm, but it was like touching burning iron. He shook me off with the strength that should not have belonged to him. His last words thundered through the chapel. Let the altar live through the chosen. Then he collapsed. The glow of the altar dimmed for a moment, as if exhaling. Matthias's body lay broken at its base, his blood soaking into the cracks like water into dry earth. And then, in the silence that followed, the altar spoke, not in whispers, not in fury, but with calm authority. It used my voice. Continue. I fell to my knees, the realization clawing at me. Father Matthias's last sermon was not his own, it was the altar's. And now the pulpit was mine. Episode 14, The Black Mass. Father Matthias's body had not yet cooled when the altar demanded more. His blood still steamed on the stone, seeping into cracks like thirsty roots. But the whispers inside me rose, hungry and insistent. The command was clear. Finish the rite. I tried to flee, stumbling toward the chapel doors, but they slammed shut with a force that rattled the rafters. The crucifix above me, already blackened from fire, cracked in two and crashed to the floor. Splinters rained across the aisle like falling stars. The altar pulsed, its veins glowing red. The air thickened, pressing me down until I staggered forward, my knees nearly buckling. And then I heard them, the monks who had fled. Their voices filled the chapel, though the pews were empty. A phantom congregation. They were chanting, not in Latin, not in prayer, in the dead tongue. The sound rose like a tide, a chorus of the damned woven through my own breath. I clutched my ears, but it was useless. The chant was inside me, vibrating my bones, curling around my heart like a noose. The candles flared with black fire. Statues of saints wept streams of ash. The altar groaned, splitting wider until a fissure opened at its core. From within spilled a light that was not light at all, dark radiance, heavy and suffocating, painting the walls with shadows that writhed like living things. And then the ritual began. Books I had never seen before appeared upon the pews, their pages turning without hands. Chalices filled with blood materialized upon the steps. The air reeked of incense and decay. Every detail mirrored the Holy Mass, yet reversed, twisted, corrupted. Where there should have been bread, there was ash. Where there should have been wine, there was blood. Where there should have been blessing, there was curse. And at the center of it all stood me. The altar spoke, not as a whisper now, but as a command that shook the walls. Vessel. I dropped to my knees, gasping as the shadows tightened around me. I knew then what Matthias had prepared me for, not to fight, but to lead. The altar was demanding its own liturgy, and I was to be its priest. Trembling, I raised my hands, though it was not my will that moved them. The chant poured from my lips in the dead tongue, each syllable tearing me apart, each word binding me closer to the stone. Blood welled from my palms, dripping onto the floor, and the fissure in the altar widened. Something stirred inside, something vast, something that had waited centuries for this night. The Black Mass had begun, and the congregation that answered my voice was not of this world. Episode 15, The Altar's Tongue. The chapel was no longer a chapel. It had become a mouth. Every wall breathed, every pew groaned like ribs under strain. The shadows that danced along the ceiling were not cast by fire, but by something alive, writhing, waiting, and I was its tongue. The altar's fissure gaped wider, glowing with that black radiance. My body trembled, but my lips did not stop moving. Words spilled out of me in the dead tongue, a torrent of syllables too ancient for my mind to contain. I wanted to scream, but the scream was swallowed and reshaped into chant. The congregation answered. They filled the chapel, phantoms of monks and priests long dead, their faces pale with ash, their mouths gaping open as they repeated my words. Their voices layered with mine until the air vibrated like the strings of some vast, invisible instrument. Father Matthias's body twitched at the base of the altar. His eyes, long dimmed, flared for one last moment. And I knew, even in death, he was part of this liturgy. The altar throbbed, its veins pulsed with molten blood, the cracks splitting until they revealed not stone but flesh, dark and wet. I felt its hunger beat in rhythm with my own heart, and then it spoke through me. My jaw locked, my tongue twisted, but the voice that came forth was not mine. It was vast, layered, infinite. It thundered in the dead tongue, yet every word was etched into my soul in perfect clarity. We are remembered, we are returned. The phantoms wailed, falling to their knees. The pews cracked under their invisible weight. I staggered, but the altar pulled me back, tethered by veins of fire running from its fissure into my skin. I saw visions, cities crumbling in fire, oceans swallowing lands, towers of faith collapsing into dust. And over it all, the hymn I sang now, the hymn that had waited centuries, the hymn unfinished until me. The final word pressed against my lips. I knew if I spoke it, the hymn would be complete, the covenant sealed. I tried to resist. God help me, I tried. My throat strained, my chest burned, but the syllable forced itself upward like bile. And then I heard it. My mother's voice, as I remembered it from childhood, calling my name. For a heartbeat, I thought it was mercy, salvation breaking through. But when I turned, her voice was twisted, reversed, echoing in the dead tongue. The altar was mocking me with her memory. Tears scalded my face, my lips parted. The word left me. The fissure split wide. A roar shook the chapel, shaking dust from the rafters. And in that moment, I understood the truth. I was no longer a man who heard the altar. I was the altar. Its tongue, its voice, its curse. And through me, it would never be silent again.
Epilogue: The silence that wasn't. They found the chapel weeks later. Or rather, what was left of it. The roof had collapsed inward, blackened beams jutting like broken ribs. The crucifix was nothing but ash. The pews, warped and split, smelled of smoke and old blood. And yet the altar remained whole, untouched, waiting. The villagers whispered of what they saw when they entered. How the air was thick with the taste of iron. How no birds sang near the monastery. No insects stirred. How the altar seemed to breathe. They carried away the dead, or what they thought were the dead. Father Matthias, unrecognizable but still curled at the altar's base. Dr. Corvus, his eyes burned white, his hands locked around a page of translation scrawled in frantic ink. And me? There was no body. They searched the crypts, the cells, the fields. Nothing. Only blood on the stone floor, dragged in patterns that spelled words no villager could read. The monastery was abandoned soon after. Walls crumbled. Ivy climbed where prayers once rose. Time buried it all, except the altar. But silence never truly returned. Travelers spoke of hearing chants when passing the ruins at night. Low, guttural, layered voices humming in a tongue long dead. They swore the sound followed them, clinging to their ears long after they left. One man claimed he saw me, my face pale as wax, my lips cracked but moving ceaselessly, shaping words he could not understand. He said I stood behind the altar, hands raised like a priest. He fled before the last syllable left my mouth. And so the story became rumor, and rumor became warning. The villagers tell their children never to step inside after dark, never to answer if they hear their own name whispered on the wind. But I know the truth. There is no chapel now. No monks. No Rome to stand between the world and the altar. There is only me. And the hymn that never ends. I sing it still. Every syllable burns. But it burns with purpose. The tongue of the dead flows through me, carrying promises older than Eden. Hungers deeper than hell. The altar is no longer bound to stone, it lives in me. In my breath. In every word I cannot keep inside. And sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, the world itself listens. You may think this story ends here, in ruins swallowed by time. But the altar's tongue does not fade. It only waits for ears willing to hear. Perhaps even now, as you read these words, you feel it, like a whisper at the edge of thought. A syllable you almost recognize, though you've never learned it. Be careful, because once you understand it, you belong to it.